Morning, everybody. What I want to do for the next few minutes that I have is to talk about experiences of the MU teaching programme and to try and put it in the context of one of the Sustainable Development Goals in particular, which is Goal 4. So that goal is actually about ensuring equitable and inclusive education and lifelong learning for all citizens. And one of the things I've noticed in Maynooth, and I'm sure it's the same in your institutions, is there's a really good dialogue happening, particularly among faculty. And in the library in Maynooth, we've had opportunities to be part of that around how you can embed the SDGs as part of the curriculum and bring them in maybe as part of assessment criteria or facilitate discussions in the classroom. But something I think hasn't been talked about that much is how the process of teaching at tertiary level, and I think the library can really position themselves in this, how that in itself is actually delivering an inclusive and equitable approach. Now, I've asked for the timekeeper to be gesticulating wildly at me because actually to kind of get to the point where I want to share experiences so far and hopefully a bit of future direction, I need to just give you a bit of context about the team. I do have to talk because it has really impacted our ability to deliver this, where COVID-19 has led to at least some sense of that, and then move on to the SDG and that goal in particular, and then a bit of discussion. So hopefully I'll get through as much of that as I can. I might have to canter a bit in places. So just to start by setting the scene, giving you some context and telling you a little bit about the Teaching and Research Development team, which I manage in Maynooth. So a number of years ago, we chose a functional model moving away from the subject-based model of support, which in our case was based around support at a faculty level. And within the functional model, the key areas we chose were teaching, academic engagement, and research support. And just to say very briefly kind of how that maps out in terms of what the responsibilities are. So our teaching and learning librarians are responsible chiefly for all of the supports, the teaching, the workshops, whether that's face-to-face, online content, and resources for the undergraduate and postgraduate communities. And those of you who were here yesterday in this room might have heard Saoirse and Fiona talking about the work that we do to really communicate those resources and push them out to social media. So a lot happening in that area. In research support then, and again, Kieran, who spoke to us yesterday, our research support librarian, he's then taking it from the point of the research postgraduates up into PhDs and the wider research and academic community, and as well as the research support services and all the teaching and instruction that goes along with that, representing the library in terms of the dialogue and the discussions on the MU research agenda. And bringing it together, I suppose, in terms of making this being a functional model is the role of academic engagement librarian, whose main role there is to have that conversation, so to promote out what we're doing, but then to receive back the feedback of the needs of the academic community and where we can develop those and seek to collaborate. So that's a bit of the overview. Something I get asked and I wanted to address because it's relevant for later on is, well, what about, is there a silo effect then? If you've broken it into these functions, do you then not have opportunities where you overlap, or are you missing areas and so on? And it's a really valid concern and probably became more so when we had to really in a targeted way address it during the COVID situation. So we've had to really make a decision to focus on collaborative projects, and what that means is that at least twice a year we hold a planning meeting where we look to see what we've done and what we hope to do, and make some decisions around team-wide collaborative initiatives that in some capacity or other will involve everybody on the team, although we aim for it to be led by one person. And one of the things that we're kind of getting better at, I think, and again, Fiona and Saoirse covered this well yesterday, is trying to be strategic around our content. So you'll see when I talk a little bit more about the amount of time that's put in to the content that we're creating to try and deliver the classes that we offer. And a lot of the time we need to ask ourselves, what can we do with this content? How can we reuse it? Can it be used for other purposes? Can it be mapped to a different area within that model that we're spoken about? And just the general making sure we meet weekly, where we check our agendas, anything that's a priority, and sharing the needs that anybody might have. And something else that we try to do, time permitting, and hope to do more of, is establish a community of practice where we're bringing our learning back, maybe something that we've tried in the classroom, such as a recent one on ways that we engaged with students using audience engagement tools, or trying to solve a challenge that we have, such as that mentioned by Fiona and Saoirse around our communications approach. So just a bit on the classes specifically on teaching. So these statistics are from 2021-22. And in terms of the hours delivered, then we had 208 classes delivered, which equated to 82 hours of preparation. And then in terms of person hours equated to that, that was just under 3,000 hours. So it's hard to see what that means in terms of the time. So the preparation time then equates to, if it were one person, 14 weeks of one person working full time, and the delivery itself of classes is 6 weeks. So it's significant in a team that in total is 8 people when we're at full strength, and not all of those people have teaching commitments. So I suppose thinking of that sustainability and something that's trying to inform our thinking is, how are we making the right choices that is beneficial for our time, but the outputs of what we're doing is actually meeting an agenda that serves the community. So a little bit about COVID-19, and I suppose one of the challenges is that we did a lot of talking about the situation we're in when it happened in 2020, and there's certainly been a share of reflection, but we haven't reached, I think we thought we were going to get back to some kind of equilibrium that we could then do this proper reflection, and we haven't got there, and we're probably not going to. So just wanted to highlight a couple of things that I came across when I was thinking about these topics, and don't really have time to say a huge amount, or at least I shouldn't have the time to say a huge amount, but I have put the references at the end. So in terms of the student experience, there were 2 projects that I came across and had an involvement with the second one that just highlighted a couple of points about the student experience during COVID. One was a research project called Growing Up in Ireland, which is a longitudinal study initially run by the ESRI since 2006 and now maintained by the CSO, and that study took a cohort of children who now, there's two cohorts, and now they're aged 25 and 14 respectively, and they survey them and the whole kind of life that they lead periodically. So in the time of the pandemic in 2020, 72% of that cohort, who were 22-year-olds, were living at home, and in terms of their kind of general well-being, there was a significant increase. Unsurprisingly, we probably all could have echoed it, that 48% of them were reporting low moods. That was kind of one context of our user community. The Enhancing Digital Teaching and Learning in Irish Universities project then, or EDTL project, that HEA-funded project had begun prior to COVID in 2019 with a view to establishing how digital learning could be enhanced and established and embedded into Irish university practices. So there were staff and student ambassadors in each university, and Dr. Sharon Flynn was the lead on the project. And then they found themselves, when COVID hit, kind of being in a position where they turned their focus completely on how we'd adapt to this online learning environment. And one of the reasons I wanted to mention it, because I think it provided an incredible snapshot of the student experience as it was happening during the pandemic. Sharon took the decision to run weekly seminars online, and many of you might have attended them. I know they were kind of a staple for me every Monday. And different aspects of what was happening at that time were considered. And I think the point I wanted to make, I suppose, was that students became real active collaborators. So they were part of the discussion, the presenters, and the solution. And arising from whatever the topic was, whatever output was developed, there would be an output that was from the instructor side and one that was hearing the student voice, and that happened the whole way through. And it really, for me, felt like a really good example of authentic learning, where not only was the student voice being heard, but they were being brought in as part of the output, and I suppose having agency in what they were delivering. And there's just a snapshot, and I have the link at the end. The resource, the EDTL blog, is there with all the resources, those recordings, and it's incredibly well structured in terms of, if you visit any one resource, you'll be taken to the corresponding linked resources that go along with it. And then just very, very briefly, some items that arose from the literature that I think we need to consider. So the next point isn't going to be any surprise as to what the barriers that have been identified for students. So accessibility issues, whether that's having equipment or the technology, their own isolation, the capacity of the instructors to meet their needs or to have sufficient resources to do so, and their own motivation and desire to be in that space. But I think the point that I then came across was that how significant this was for any one individual or cohort is affected by a whole range of independent variables, and these are some of them. So the challenge then is, and I think I've seen this a lot in discussions I've been involved when we're trying to, thanks a million, Regina, we're trying to address those very clear barriers that we're now trying to manage in delivery of teaching in third level. And yet they don't impact people in the same way, and they don't impact people at all in some cases. Something that's a negative for one person was absolutely a positive for somebody else. And I'll be coming back to a little bit more. And again, I have some more references at the end if you want to read up about that. So to speak about the Maynooth student experience at this time and since, so one of the things, and this is something in the next slides has been borne out by the UN's further work on Goal 4, what COVID has done is take those existing inequalities and expanded and deepened them. So we know ourselves that there's a whole cohort of students who didn't progress with their education or who didn't, engage with it in the way they wanted and weren't able to do so even after restrictions lifted. So it seems to me that for those who are facing inequity and inequality already, that is being expanded and deepened, and I think that needs to be our call for action in terms of how we re-engage with people who experience that. Maynooth is a community university, and it always has been where it's situated. Even within the greater Dublin area, there are people who are commuting within that, and then now we're seeing students who are commuting daily from as far away as the Midlands and Sligo, and having a student experience that is therefore not what we would have wished for, and maybe not what is meeting their needs in the way that it should be. On the other hand, what I've noticed from talking to a lot of students is this is also an act of choice for them, and that's something I want to come back to. There are students who are saying that whether they could find accommodation, so it's obviously exacerbated by the cost of living and the lack of affordable rental accommodation, even where they could, a lot of students are saying that they're now actively making the choice to only come to campus on certain days and to kind of take the hit, if you like, by choosing to be absent from campus on other days. And I think that's interesting. Just to say, in Maynooth, we are still one of the highest rates of students who are coming to university at nearly 29% under the Access programme, Maynooth Access programme. And again, I think there's a whole set of needs and supports that needs to be particularly thought of that's different from maybe some of the other learners as well, and I'll be coming back to that. The other big thing is in employment. So again, there's a variety of reasons, but students are effectively taking up full-time jobs, and sometimes that's done out of, a necessity, and a lot of the time students are saying it's choice, it's how they see the model of their studying and the working, and that's something that we need to consider when we're thinking about how to deliver to them. And then the final point is something which has been portrayed when I've been in meetings as something that's a negative thing perhaps, but it is actually something that I think is both a reality and it's kind of desirable. Students now want to consume, they want to make choices, active choices about how they engage with their content, how they put it together, and it speaks to that idea of the diversity of students that we're facing, and we can't, I think, decide to them that they must operate in a certain way. So an example of this that I've seen in Maynooth, and I'm sure your institutions are the same, it became really necessary, it was felt, to say to students, you must be in the classroom, you must attend, we will stop live streaming or recording, the slides will be available, but essentially it's in person only. But at the same time, most of us are working in blended environments, we hold our meetings online, and we make choices based on our needs at the time. And it seems to me that we can't really do that and not be trying to address the students' demand to have that as well. How am I doing? Okay, not very good. So I just popped that in there for an example of that kind of different experience. This was a slide, I know it's difficult to see in this background, but this was something for the online sessions that we would start by asking students, how are you today? And this one I kept because it really summed it up. For some students, they were doing great and some were messing and there was jokey comments. There was a lot of people feeling overwhelmed, and tucked away inside there's the nearly dropped out. So we had a whole panoply of experience for some people who it was all going fine for, and somebody else who was probably at the end of their tether. So just moving on to the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'll put this all up together. So this is just really giving a synopsis of what the Sustainable Development Goals are and where they came about from 2015. And I suppose with the 17 goals, the idea is to see them as integrated tasks. So if you're doing one, you may also be advancing some of the other ones. And again, at their core, their priority is about improving the future for those who are currently the furthest behind. And I think, again, that needs to be something that we need to retain and remember. So, sorry, goal 4 then. So I started by just mentioning what goal 4 was. And then the UN has kind of updated their information that pertains to that goal by saying that essentially, as I've kind of alluded to there, COVID-19 has deepened that global learning crisis. And at a global level, you can see there from some of the statistics that that is really problematic. I'll go really quickly because I'm running completely out of time, which I knew would happen. But the National Access Plan is something I turned to look to see where Ireland was positioning themselves in this context of supporting those who are coming from a position of inequality or needing further support. So I'll move away from that and just go to the next one. So they ultimately came out with a set of student-centred goals, which we've kind of taken and adopted as something we want to pursue in how we deliver our teaching. So to start by making sure that decisions are evidence-driven and that then they fall around these core principles of inclusivity, flexibility, clarity, coherence, and there's sustainability mentioned again. Okay, so, moving to the current situation in terms of what we have. So I'll put this all up together. So what we found really in the last, certainly year, maybe 2 years, was that the class requests were absolutely increasing exponentially, but lecturers were looking for us to do all of these things that they weren't being able to achieve in their own classes. So one of the things I've noticed, there's always that challenge when you're in the room and trying to show students the value of academic information and the searching process and all those kind of laudable things we do. But one of the challenges was that a lot of the lecturers had nearly accepted that that was gone. And I've said to my colleagues a few times that more than once I've had a lecturer saying, well, so you guys don't actually use library or you couldn't use articles and stuff, you just use Google. So we're being asked, thanks a million, we're being asked to do something that we don't necessarily have, the wherewithal to do within the classes, and we cannot meet all of those information needs. In return then, the lecturers are trying to address this by developing scalable assignments and asking for more and more support from us with those assignments, which is taking up a huge amount of time. So let's just move on. So these are some of the examples. There's a Padlet, our VVox for an audience engagement tool, doing forms to establish learning needs beforehand, forms to establish the efficacy of our classes afterwards. Just started discovering that the amount of time for any one class was just becoming effectively unsustainable. So one of my colleagues, also called Áine on the team, she came up with a good phrase that I think we're going to kind of use as a theme, that we need to reduce the noise of what we're doing, because even where a class is really valuable for helping students, at what cost does it come and what's all that noise and extra activity that you have to do? So you're thinking of activities to engage them in the classroom, the work you do with the lecturer beforehand, the establishment of their prior knowledge, the establishment of their needs for the class, and it's all just, too much. So one of the things we're doing is going back to our menu of classes and the learning outcomes that we have and actually assessing those and probably, if you like, bringing them back to kind of much more simpler focus in a way. The other thing that we want to do is we're going to put the focus back on our program of workshops and events in person and online and try and map those learning outcomes back into the program of events so that we can really, I suppose, drive activity through those coordinated events that we structure rather than necessarily giving a class on request as we typically do at the moment. We're really keen to see how we can work with students as collaborators, and in 60 seconds. And we've actually done quite a bit of this, and I probably won't get to this before my time finishes, but the last few slides give some examples of that. But we've done that in terms of collaborative library cafes. We've worked with them as ambassadors. We've engaged with them in terms of content and collections. And what we need to do is now put that together into something that we can share out with the wider user community. We're also spending a lot of time developing our partnerships and redeveloping our partnerships with the other professional services units to see that our combined efforts deliver some of these tasks that we're trying to do. Something that we have, and Saoirse, who's here today, has worked in this. At the moment, we're going kind of micro learning points, so really, really quick little droplets of information. So we thought we were doing well by having 4 or 5 minutes recordings that students could access, but we discovered, and looking at the students' usage and engagement with them, everyone was stopping at about like 1.5 minutes or so. So now we have an upper limit of, thanks a million, of 2 minutes for these micro little pieces of content that we try to scale up to something larger and then just drop out in social media. I'll just pop up the last, I think that's the last one. The very last one on that is that what we noticed when we looked at everything we were doing, and the next few slides cover that, we were doing loads of really interesting things, but we now need to find a way, a platform to bring it together, something that's a bit beyond just our website, our YouTube channel, and our guides. So there are a number of initiatives within the university that we think we hopefully can work to, but the idea is to have something that works in a self-contained unit and is modular and that students can select from. And I have a couple more slides that you can look at maybe to see some examples of those initiatives afterwards. Thanks very much for your time, and thank you.